You can't.
I think there's something wrong with me.
We learned this week of a previously undisclosed second meeting between Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin on the evening of July 7th at the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. In Trump's interview with the New York Times, he gives his version of how it came to be. Trump's wife, Melania, was sitting beside Putin at that dinner, and he walked over to talk to her, and boom, instant pull aside. Trump also offers his account of what he and Putin discussed.
She's sitting next to Putin and somebody else. And that's the way it is. So the meal is going through. And toward dessert, I went down just to say hello to Melania. And while I was there, I said hello to Putin. Really pleasantries more than anything else. Was not a long conversation, but it was, could be 15 minutes, just talked about things. It was very interesting. We talked about adoption.
You did?
Russian adoption, yeah. I've always found that interesting because, he ended that years ago. And I actually talked about Russian adoption with him, which is interesting because that was a part of a conversation that Don had with this meeting that I think, as I said, most other people, when they call up and they say, by the way, we have information on your opponent. I think most politicians, I was just with a lot of people, they said, who wouldn't have taken a meeting like that?
Interesting non sequitur. Well, whether or not you're convinced by Trump's story you just heard, if you're actually talking about Russian adoption with Vladimir Putin, then what you're really talking about is only one thing, the Magnitsky Act, which means you're talking about sanctions. The Magnitsky Act was signed by President Barack Obama in 2012 after a Russian lawyer who was investigating Russian government corruption died in a Russian prison. The law imposes sanctions against individuals in Russia, certain government officials, and businessmen who committed human rights violations. And it's the worst kind of sanctions if you happen to be running a kleptocracy, because it's sanctions against wealthy businessmen who are beholden to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin hates the Magnitsky Act. Ask any Russian expert, and they'll tell you getting rid of it may be his top priority. It was Putin's retaliation for the Magnitsky Act to ban American families from adopting Russian children. And joining me now is MSNBC contributor Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and the author of How to Catch a Russian Spy. So how surprised were you, my friend Naveed Jamali, to hear Donald Trump openly admit that what he was talking to Vladimir Putin about was adoptions, which means Magnitsky?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that's probably the most disturbing part is that gesture. I don't even know where that came from or what that means.
The come-hither gesture to get himself a meeting.
The second thing is you're absolutely right. I mean, the act goes back to what I believe was a dangle that the Russians put in front of Don Jr. So clearly it's a narrative that they've wanted to push. The adoptions are directly, the Russians reciprocated when we signed this law into effect by suspending adoption. So clearly there's the potential for a quid pro quo here. But again, Joy, at the end of the day, why are we offering, even discussing offering anything to Russia, whether it's the compound, whether it's, easing of sanctions or getting into conversations of adoptions? Look, the Russians clearly had an involvement in the elections, and our president should be taking a strong line, not casually strolling into having pleasantries for 15 minutes and then not disclosing it to the American public.
And from the Russian point of view, the American president coming over and, according to Donald Trump, just striking up a casual conversation about adoptions, what does that get Vladimir Putin?
Well, look, even if it was, as President Trump said, a casual conversation, there was nothing really of substance discussed, although he did, to his own admission, discuss. Yeah. Right, exactly. Even if there wasn't anything of substance, and it really was just lighthearted banter, again, this is something where this is optics. This is basically saying to the Russians, you have leverage over me. I am, the fact that he walked over, that he initiated it, that is a clear signal to the Russians that he is interested in starting a dialogue, and they're going to pick up on that. So at the very least, if you're going to negotiate something with the Russians, you've ceded the high ground just by doing that. And
Donald Trump has said that he considers it, and we've been talking about it throughout the show, that he had a red line if Robert Mueller were to go into his finances. Just sort of explain to us how these lures work when Russian agents want to influence an American or make them an agent of influence. How is money used to do that?
Well, so there's these 4 pillars of recruitment in the spy world that is often referred to. It's known as MICE, so money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And essentially, those are viewed as the cornerstones for why someone would, well, commit treason and voluntarily, spy for another country. Money can be used to, look, it's a great door opener. If someone is, that's why when you fill out this SF-86, the Simple Form 86, one of the things that they often look for is if you are in severe debt, because that is viewed as something that a foreign intelligence agency can build on, can approach you with money. So look, money in many cases is the easiest way to recruit someone. We do it, the Russians do it, and it's, it's probably the easiest way to recruit an asset.
Yeah, and so I guess it's not surprising that Mueller is following the money, both Manafort's, Kushner's, and et cetera, and Donald Trump's, right?
Absolutely. And, look, Joy, the crazy thing about this is that the investigation, the president's right, the investigation started with Russia. But what if Bob Mueller discovers another crime that has nothing to do with Russia through the innocent investigation here, whether it's money laundering, whatever it might be? Is he going to turn a blind eye? Absolutely not. He's got a legal obligation to refer that back. So it's very likely that if there is other instances of criminality in Trump's background or anyone else in an investigation that is not necessarily directly related to Russia, that may come up. And I think that's potentially the likely course. I mean, we're hearing that Mueller is expanding into that's probably the likely course for, charges and things like that. I have to say that, dealing with espionage and things with intelligence, it's so hard to prove these cases, if you look at the history of it, that in many instances, what ends up happening is the federal government just basically keeps, bringing these cases out, and eventually they get a plea bargain.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's going to focus on sort of, money and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, to quote Ben Whitty's tick, 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 Naveed Jamali.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy.
And coming up, how does the president's 6-month report card look? Here's a hint. It doesn't include any major legislative victory. Plus, some awkward opposition to Trump's latest policy push in tonight's Thing 1, Thing 2, just after the break.
We will not be quiet.
This guy's behavior doesn't make any sense.
We will not back down.
That seems like a foolish strategy.
We will not be manipulated or played for fools.
If they did know, that's as bad as if they didn't know.
We will remain resolute.
This doesn't look good, General.
Looking where others aren't looking.
There is something new and big that has just arisen.
Asking what others aren't asking.
Why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
And wake up ready to do it again.
The shirt, an essential part of the classic outfit, but for too long, shirts have been too long. Too many people are forced to choose between hiding their pants with their shirt or hiding their shirt with their pants. That's why we designed the untucked shirt, cut to the perfect length for whatever look you're looking for. Casual, classy, casually classy, because only the untucked shirt was designed to be worn untucked.
The Jaguar F-Pace. 2017 World Car of the Year and 2017 World Car Design of the Year. With our first SUV, we didn't just change the game, we elevated it. For great offers, visit your local Jaguar retailer today.
Register today at Elite Singles, where you'll benefit from 100% verified profiles, an extensive personality test, and tailored matches in your area. EliteSingles.com. Never more ready to fall in love again.
If you are told you have cancer, explore your treatment options with specialists who treat only cancer. Every